Ethan leaned back in the old leather chair, the quiet hum of the evening settling over him like a blanket. The soft glow of his desk lamp cast long shadows across the room, the perfect ambience for reflection. On the surface, his life seemed ideal. Steady job, charming apartment, and a relationship with Liam that most envied. Yet beneath that polished veneer lay a tempest, a secret gnawing at the edges of his conscience. He thought of Liam, his partner of 3 years. Liam had a way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary, of pulling laughter out of Ethan even on his worst days. They shared the kind of bond that others sought but rarely found. A partnership built on trust, love, and an unspoken understanding. Yet recently, Ethan felt a growing distance between them. An invisible wall they both pretended wasn't there. Uncle David often warned Ethan about the fragility of love. It's not the storms that ruin a relationship, David had once said, but the slow leaks you ignore. David, a man in his early 50s with graying hair and a wisdom born from experience, had been a second father to Ethan since his parents passed. His advice was always laced with care, but Ethan had never imagined he'd need it quite so urgently. The trouble began 2 months ago. A casual night out with friends had brought Derek into Ethan's life. Derek, with his sharp wit and magnetic smile, was the kind of man who commanded attention without effort. Their first meeting had been innocent enough. A fleeting conversation, a shared laugh, but something unspoken lingered between them. Ethan couldn't deny the spark. It was dangerous, intoxicating, and entirely unexpected. He loved Liam, he reminded himself constantly, but there was something about Derek that awakened a part of him he hadn't realized was dormant. It wasn't just attraction. It was the thrill of being noticed in a way that felt new. The next time Ethan saw Derek, it wasn't by chance. He told himself it was harmless, a coffee, a casual chat, but deep down he knew better. Their conversations grew longer, their jokes more personal, their silences charged with possibilities. By the time they met for drinks late one evening, Ethan felt the walls of his resolve crumbling. That night marked the beginning of his betrayal. Ethan had crossed a line he couldn't uncross, and no amount of rationalization could undo it. The guilt weighed heavily on him, but so did the exhilaration. He was caught in a web of his own making, one thread pulling him toward Liam and the other toward Derek. Ethan's world was spiraling, and he knew it. His once open relationship with Liam became shrouded in secrecy. He avoided direct eye contact, deflected questions about his late nights, and found excuses to stay away longer than necessary. Liam noticed the changes but didn't press, perhaps out of trust or perhaps out of fear of what the answers might be. Uncle David's words echoed in Ethan's mind. Truth has a way of surfacing. No matter how deep you bury it, he tried to ignore the voice, tried to convince himself he could manage the situation, but the cracks were widening. He couldn't escape the truth for long, and he wasn't sure he wanted to. One evening, as Ethan sat alone in his apartment, Derek called. His voice, low and inviting, carried an urgency Ethan found impossible to resist. "I need to see you," Derek said, and Ethan didn't hesitate. Minutes later, he was out the door, leaving behind the echoes of Liam's laughter on their answering machine. The meeting was electric, as it always was. Derek had a way of making Ethan feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. Yet, even in the height of passion, a nagging thought lingered in Ethan's mind. What was he risking? As the night drew on, Ethan found himself staring at his reflection in Derek's bathroom mirror. The man looking back at him was a stranger, someone torn between love and desire, loyalty and temptation. He didn't recognize himself, and the realization cut deeper than he expected. When Ethan returned home, Liam was asleep on the couch, a half-empty glass of wine on the table beside him. The sight was a poignant reminder of everything Ethan was jeopardizing. He stood there for a moment, heart heavy with conflicting emotions, before retreating to the bedroom alone. The next morning, Uncle David called unexpectedly. "Just checking in," he said, his voice warm but probing. Ethan tried to keep the conversation light, but David's intuition was razor-sharp. "Something's on your mind," David said. Ethan dismissed it with a forced laugh, but David didn't press further. As Ethan hung up, he couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble. He was juggling too much, and the weight was becoming unbearable. Derek, Liam, David, they were all pulling him in different directions, and he was running out of room to maneuver. The final blow came that evening when Liam suggested a weekend getaway to reconnect. "Just us," he said, his eyes hopeful. Ethan agreed, though his heart wasn't in it. The walls were closing in, and he knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came crashing down. As he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Ethan realized he was at a crossroads. He could continue down the path of secrecy and risk losing everything, or he could confront the mess he'd made and face the consequences. Neither option felt easy, but he knew a choice had to be made. The question was, did he have the courage to choose? Ethan paced his apartment, the walls seeming to close in with each passing moment. The once cozy space now felt suffocating, each corner a reminder of secrets and lies. Liam had left early that morning for work, his parting words laced with a quiet affection that only deepened Ethan's guilt. He hadn't slept, tormented by the weight of his decisions. By midday, he resolved to call Derek, seeking solace in the only person who seemed to understand the chaos inside him. "I need to see you," Ethan said, his voice shaky. Derek agreed without hesitation, and they arranged to meet that evening. As the day dragged on, Ethan tried to distract himself, but his thoughts kept returning to Liam and the life they had built. The trust he had betrayed loomed over him, a silent accusation that refused to be ignored. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Uncle David. "Ethan," David's voice came through, steady and firm. "I'm in town for a few days. Thought I'd stop by this evening." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Tonight? Is that a problem?" Ethan hesitated, scrambling for an excuse. "No, of course not. Just caught me off guard." "Good. I'll be there around 8. The line went dead, leaving Ethan in a spiral of panic. He couldn't cancel his plans with Derek, but the thought of David showing up unannounced was equally daunting. Torn between the two, he decided to gamble, hoping he could juggle both without incident. By the time Derek arrived, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Ethan ushered him inside quickly, their greeting a mix of urgency and restrained passion. "We don't have much time," Ethan said, his voice low. Derek raised an eyebrow, amused. "Always in a rush, aren't we?" Ethan didn't respond, leading him to the living room where the air between them grew heavy with anticipation. For a brief moment, the world outside ceased to exist, their connection consuming everything else. But the illusion shattered when a sharp knock echoed through the apartment. Ethan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "It's him," he whispered, eyes wide. "Who?" Derek asked, his tone shifting to concern. "David. My uncle." Panic coursed through Ethan as he scrambled to compose himself. He motioned for Derek to stay silent and hidden while he moved to answer the door. David stood on the other side, his sharp eyes immediately picking up on Ethan's disheveled appearance. "Is this a bad time?" David asked, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. Ethan forced a smile, closing the door behind him. "No, of course not. Just wasn't expecting you so soon." David's gaze swept the room, his expression unreadable. "You seem tense." "I'm fine," Ethan replied too quickly, the lie hanging awkwardly in the air. David's attention lingered on a pair of shoes near the couch, shoes that didn't belong to Ethan or Liam. His brow furrowed, and the silence between them grew oppressive. "Is there someone else here?" Before Ethan could respond, Derek emerged from the hallway, his face a mixture of defiance and resignation. The room seemed to hold its breath as David turned to face him. "Ethan," David said, his voice calm but cold, "what's going on?" Ethan's mind raced, searching for words that wouldn't come. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't anticipated. "It's not what it looks like," he stammered, though even he didn't believe the words. David exhaled slowly, his disappointment palpable. "I'm not here to judge you," he said, his tone softer now. "But you need to explain yourself." Derek stepped forward, his voice steady. "This isn't just Ethan's fault. I knew what I was getting into." "That doesn't make it right," David replied, his gaze fixed on Ethan. "Does Liam know?" Ethan shook his head, shame washing over him. "No, and he can't." David crossed his arms, his expression stern but compassionate. "Secrets have a way of surfacing, Ethan. You can't keep this hidden forever." The tension in the room was suffocating, but David's presence also brought a strange sense of clarity. He wasn't there to condemn Ethan but to guide him, to help him face the consequences of his actions. "Derek, I think it's best if you leave," David said, his tone polite but firm. Derek hesitated, glancing at Ethan for reassurance. "It's okay," Ethan said quietly, avoiding Derek's eyes. After Derek left, the apartment felt unbearably silent. David sat on the couch, gesturing for Ethan to join him. "You've always been honest with me," David began. "Why did you feel the need to hide this?" Ethan looked down, unable to meet his uncle's gaze. "I don't know," he admitted. "It just happened. And now I don't know how to stop it." David nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Affairs don't just happen, Ethan. They're choices, even if they feel out of control. The real question is, what do you want to do now?" Ethan didn't have an answer. He felt torn between the thrill of his connection with Derek and the deep bond he shared with Liam. "I don't want to lose Liam," he said finally. "But I don't know how to fix this." David placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, his touch grounding. "You have to be honest, with Liam and with yourself. The longer you wait, the harder it will be." Ethan nodded, tears welling in his eyes. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that he might be able to salvage what he had broken. But the road ahead was daunting, and he wasn't sure if he had the strength to face it. As David left that evening, he turned to Ethan one last time. "You can't change the past, but you can decide what kind of future you want. Don't waste that chance." Ethan stood in the doorway long after David had gone, the weight of his words sinking in. He knew he couldn't keep running from the truth. The time had come to confront his mistakes and take responsibility for the life he wanted to build. Ethan woke the next morning with a heavy heart. The events of the previous evening replayed in his mind with brutal clarity. Uncle David's words lingered like a specter, urging him toward honesty and accountability. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a sliver of determination, a fragile yet resolute sense that he needed to face the mess he had created. The weight of his actions hung over him as he poured himself a cup of coffee. He stared out the window, watching the world move on without him, and realized he couldn't delay any longer. The decision was clear. He had to tell Liam the truth. Liam arrived home that evening, his face lighting up at the sight of Ethan. The warmth in his eyes was a painful reminder of the trust Ethan had shattered. "Hey you," Liam said, leaning in to kiss him. Ethan pulled away slightly, the gesture subtle but enough to make Liam pause. "We need to talk," Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm. Liam frowned, concern etching lines across his face. "What's going on?" Ethan gestured toward the couch, motioning for Liam to sit. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. "I haven't been honest with you," he began, his voice trembling. "There's something I need to tell you, and it's not easy." Liam's expression shifted from concern to apprehension. "Ethan, you're scaring me." Ethan looked down, unable to meet Liam's gaze. "I made a mistake," he admitted. I've been seeing someone else." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Liam's face went pale, his hands clenching into fists. "You've been cheating on me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I never meant for it to happen. It was a mistake. A terrible, selfish mistake. But you deserve to know the truth." For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of Ethan's confession pressing down on both of them. Then Liam stood abruptly, pacing the room as his emotions boiled over. "How could you do this?" he demanded, his voice rising. "After everything we've been through, after everything we've built together?" "I don't have an excuse," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "I can't justify what I did. But I love you, Liam. I've always loved you, and I want to fix this. If you'll let me." Liam stopped pacing, his back turned to Ethan. His shoulders shook, and Ethan realized he was crying. The sight was unbearable, a visceral reminder of the pain he had caused. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Liam said finally, his voice raw. "You've broken something in us, Ethan. Something I'm not sure we can ever get back." Ethan felt his chest tighten, but he nodded. "I understand," he said quietly, "but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." Liam turned to face him, his eyes red and filled with anguish. "You can't just erase this, Ethan. Trust doesn't come back overnight." "I know," Ethan said, "but I want to try. You mean everything to me, Liam, and I'll do whatever it takes to prove that to you." The room fell silent again, the weight of their conversation settling over them like a storm cloud. Eventually, Liam sighed and sat back down on the couch, his body slumping in defeat. "I need time," he said, his voice barely audible. "Take all the time you need," Ethan replied, his heart aching but hopeful. A few days later, Ethan met with Uncle David for coffee. The older man listened patiently as Ethan recounted his conversation with Liam. "It's a start," David said, nodding. "But the road ahead won't be easy." "I know," Ethan replied, "but I'm willing to do the work. I just don't know where to begin." David sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Start with honesty, real honesty. Not just with Liam, but with yourself. Why did this happen? What were you running from?" Ethan frowned, the question catching him off guard. "I don't know," he admitted. "I guess I felt lost, like something was missing." David leaned forward, his gaze steady. "And do you think Derek was the answer?" Ethan shook his head. "No, he was a distraction, a way to avoid dealing with my own insecurities." "Then you need to face those insecurities head-on," David said. "You owe that to yourself, and to Liam." Ethan nodded, grateful for his uncle's unwavering support. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of clarity, a path forward beginning to take shape. Over the following weeks, Ethan worked tirelessly to rebuild his relationship with Liam. He sought therapy, both individually and as a couple, confronting the issues that had driven him to stray. It wasn't easy. There were days when the progress felt painstakingly slow, and Liam's trust remained fragile. But Ethan was determined to prove his commitment, not just through words but through actions. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Liam reached for Ethan's hand. "I'm still angry," he said, his voice soft, "but I can see you're trying. And that means something." Ethan squeezed his hand, hope blossoming in his chest. "I'll never stop trying," he promised. In time, their relationship began to heal. It wasn't the same as before. The cracks remained, a testament to the pain they had endured. But they found new strength in their honesty, a deeper understanding of each other that had been missing before. As for Derek, he remained a part of Ethan's past, a reminder of the mistakes he had made and the lessons he had learned. Ethan didn't contact him again, choosing instead to focus on the future he wanted to build with Liam. Uncle David, ever the guiding figure, continued to offer his wisdom and support. "Love isn't perfect," he said one evening over dinner, "but it's worth fighting for. And you've proven you're willing to fight." Ethan smiled, his heart finally at peace. He knew the journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time he felt hopeful. He had faced the truth, owned his mistakes, and chosen to fight for the life he wanted. And that, he realized, was the most important choice of all.